Hello, I'm Gord Colson with the Rebel Jesus News. Today we're going to look at the USA, UK, and EU in prophecy. And we'll be using Rome and Babylon as models to understand where these political elements fit together. We're going to use something called iterative historicism, that prophecies can repeat essentially. We'll talk about Rome, the 10-horned beast in Daniel and Revelation, America and Britain in prophecy, the beast and its image and the mark of the beast, Babylon the Great, and most importantly, where are we in the prophetic timeline and what should we be doing as Christians. Here's the scripture references that we'll be using. So as I mentioned, iterative historicism is essentially that prophecies repeat. So the reformers, they saw in the papacy, that is the Roman Catholic Church and its hierarchy, as Antichrist. This was Martin Luther from Germany. Early Christians would have seen this 10-horned beast as the Roman Empire, that power. But that's perfectly fine. In iterative historicism, prophecies can repeat and be fulfilled in more detail. Preterism and futurism were developed by the Roman Catholic Church, Jesuits in particular, to counter this Protestant idea. So preterism is the idea that prophecy is all fulfilled back in 70 AD. Futurism means that most of it's still to be fulfilled. But it seems that these ideas were developed in order to take the heat off the papacy, and so we reject both of these as not being very satisfying. So prophecies can repeat. That's absolutely true if we examine prophecies, and the earlier fulfillments enlighten us on what the potential future fulfillments will look like. So Rome is the beast of Daniel and Revelation. And just for a quick review, there's lots of YouTube videos and other information you can get on this, but this is the classical historicist view, which is in Daniel chapter 2, there's a statue that is representative of the world powers that Daniel sees. So the head is gold, he explains this to the king of Babylon. Silver is Persia, which conquered Babylon, and the brass is Greece, and then there's two legs of iron, which is Rome. Although Rome is not mentioned, Rome is the power that conquered Greece. And then the feet are a mixture of clay and iron. And in Daniel chapter 7, that theme is then highlighted again, where we see these powers represented as these four animals. Again, Babylon, Persia, which conquers Babylon, Greece, which conquers Persia, and then finally the Roman power, which conquers Greece and then reigns supreme. There's 10 horns on this Roman power, and there's a little horn that arises from the 10 horns and removes 3 horns. So that turns out to be the papacy. But more on that later. So as we mentioned, head of gold, chest of silver, and here's some of the dates that these empires ruled. Thighs of bronze, Greece, legs of iron, Roman Republic. So there was a Western Republic and an Eastern Republic. The Western existed until about 476 CE, and the Eastern right up until 1453. The feet of iron and clay, I contend, is church-state rule. That's the very end of this statue, right at the bottom, the feet. So we have Constantine in the 4th century who made a deal with the church to help him rule his empire. So we have that first clay and iron together in Constantine and his empire, the Empire of Rome. And then in the papacy, we have the papacy uniting with the various kings of Europe. Also clay and iron. And then we have modern republican governments. So we have, take the United States and the conservative evangelicals who are closely associated with the Republican governments. And in England, we have the state church, the state church of England, that is closely aligned with the governments of the day. Now, this is rock cut out of a mountain, which is God's kingdom under Christ, and it's thrown at the statue. Daniel sees this in a vision, and it pulverizes the entire statue. So at the time when the feet of iron and clay are ruling is when God's kingdom comes and takes control of earth and removes these other kingdoms. Now, there's a very important time period, the 3.5 times. We're not going to go into a lot of detail here, but there's a lot of scriptures that talk about these 3.5 times. So the little horn that wears down the saints for times, and half a time in Daniel 7. Revelation 11 and 2, the holy city is trampled on for 42 months. So what this time period is and why it's so important is that when the Roman Empire was destroyed by northern tribes in the 5th century, what rose out of the ashes was the Roman Church. And the church consolidated power and began to rule. And so it became the next version, if you will, of Rome. And it's quite a wicked rule because the line of popes claim to be Christ on earth, representing Christ on earth. Yet the evil that they did is quite remarkable. And so we know it was not from God for the most part. So what about this 3.5 times in this 1260 days? From Ezekiel, we know that a day for a year in prophecy. So it's really 1260 years. Where is this period? And how does it affect us and our understanding? Well, the Visigoths and Alarics sacked Rome in 410. Romulus, who was the last Western emperor of Rome, was overthrown by Germanic tribes under Odoacer in 476. So this is the end of the Roman Empire. 538 CE was the first siege of the city of Rome, held by the Goths, liberated by the East Roman general Belisarius, which was short-lived. In that same year, Justinian decreed that the Pope shall be the legal head of all the holy churches in the West. Goes into effect 538 CE. So this is the beginning of the rule of the papacy in Europe. And so we take 538 as the starting point. Now, if we add 1260 years to 538, we get 1798, which is the year that the French Revolution was already rolling at that point, and what it was a humanist socialist uprising against the powers. Now the powers there were the corrupt Roman Church and the corrupt French monarchy. Well, what happened in 1798 is Napoleon put the Pope in jail, and that was pretty much the end of the Pope's power. There's still lots of influential power that the church has, but it no longer has any real political power the way it used to. It used to be able to excommunicate kings and ruin their careers and maybe their lives too. So what emerges after that, after the French Revolution, is British and American republics and European republics. So monarchies across Europe fell, and what rose were republics. That is, rule of law and democracy. Now, America and Britain has a very special relationship. It was Winston Churchill who coined the term special relationship after World War II. The United Kingdom has placed its alliance with the United States at the heart of its foreign and security policy. That's Reuters, July 6, 2018. So we had Kennedy and Macmillan, Reagan and Thatcher, Bush, Clinton and Blair, and so on. Now we have Trump and Johnson. And Johnson has just won the British election with a landslide majority. And Trump and Johnson are already cooperating on a trade deal. So we would expect that this partnership would strengthen very much in the months and years ahead. So just here are some pictures of various political leaders from America and from Britain, and how they take how they get along with each other and how they work together on various projects. So this is from the United Kingdom background, Brexit and relations with the United States. Many U.S. officials and members of Congress view the United Kingdom as the United States' closest and most reliable ally. This perception stems from a combination of factors, including a sense of shared history, values, and culture, a large and mutually beneficial economic relationship, and extensive cooperation on foreign policy and security issues. And why is this important? It's because there's a land beast in the book of Revelation. There's a beast with 10 horns that arises out of the sea. And afterwards there's a beast with 2 horns that arises out of the earth. Speaks like a dragon. Dragon being satanically inspired. It tells the earth to worship the first beast whose head wound was healed. Well, the first beast is the Roman power. How was its head wound healed? Well, it was destroyed in the 5th century. But the papacy arose out of that and began ruling over Europe, East and West. Western Europe predominantly. Makes fire come down from the sky. Predominantly, these 2 powers, British and American, dominate the air in the world through drone warfare, through their air forces and advanced weaponry systems and so on. Makes an image of the first beast, forces worship of it. Well, the image of the first beast is the first beast being the papal power in the Middle Ages. An image of that, I believe, is the state church of Britain. And what happened there was King Henry was not allowed to get divorced. The Pope wouldn't allow him to get divorced. He wanted to marry this other woman that he thought might give him sons. And the Pope wouldn't allow it. So he removed Britain from the clutches of the papacy, and he started his own church. And his own church looked very similar to the papacy. The state church of England looks very similar. They have priests and incense and an altar and all kinds of things. Looks very similar. So I believe that's the image of the beast, and we'll get more into that. No one can buy or sell unless they have the beast's mark. Well, the mark of the beast is a sign that you've willingly become a slave to this beast. So a mark in Revelation, it says a mark in your hand or a mark on your forehead. And what this indicates is slavery, because in the Roman Empire there were slaves, and you'd be branded, right? So no one can buy or sell unless they have the mark. Well, we know that right now the United States can take any country in the world that it wants, with the exception of the largest ones, like China and Russia, but it still applies there to some extent. They can introduce sanctions against countries and destroy the economies of countries. So any country that doesn't do what the United States asks can be brought to its knees economically and punished severely. And we see this going on in Iran and in Venezuela and Russia to some extent, and other countries. No one can buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast. It deceives the world. It has all the authority of the first beast, and then there's 666, this number, a man's number. Well, it deceives the world because it claims to be a Christian power. It claims, this is the United States, which is the one of the horns of the land beast, Britain being the other one. Both these countries claim to be Christian. And those Christian ties are most closely associated with the Conservative Party in Britain and the Republican Party in the United States. They have a partnership there with the church. But really, it's a partnership based on corruption and lies, and they continually lie to their own people in order to manipulate them and control them. We'll have more on this in another video. It comes out of the earth, not the sea. Well, here's the Roman Empire on the left, and those lands were already very populated. It begins in, Roman Empire begins here in Italy, just as a small town, and they basically make a deal with other small towns that if you want to be part of this new Roman Empire that we're building, you can rule too, and you can enjoy all the fruits of that rule. And so it expanded very, very quickly throughout the Mediterranean basin. But since there were people already there, it's, in a sense, it's come out of the sea, whereas the sea is a symbol for peoples and tribes and nations. This is defined in the book of Revelation. Now, America, on the other hand, there were people coming from Europe that came to America, and in comparison was pretty sparsely populated. There were, of course, First Nations people there, and lots of them, but they were, killed and pushed out, and their land stolen from them as the Europeans made their way west. So they weren't really included in the empire that was being built. So in that sense, it comes out of the earth. It comes out of a place where there's not a lot of people. And if you look at the two maps, you see the Roman Empire surrounds an ocean, whereas the American Empire and the British Empire is surrounded by ocean. Why a land beast? Well, there's two horns. So that means two composite powers, Britain and America. That's what the horns mean if we go back to Daniel. For example, Medo-Persia was a ram with two horns, because there was Media and there was Persia. Greece was represented by a he-goat with a single horn, because that was Alexander the Great, just one power. So they claim to be Christian powers, but other countries don't see it that way. There's supposed to be a light on a hill. We hear about American exceptionalism and things like this. This is all propaganda. This is part of the deception. People in America are not superior, are no different than people in any other country. That's the science of it. America and Britain's imperial approach to foreign policy has caused a lot of suffering in the world. A lot of suffering in the world. And the land beast deceives the world, claims to be all about freedom and democracy and Christian values, but it's really imperialism disguised. And you'll hear people object at this point, say, but America is not an empire. Really? These are attempts by America to overthrow other governments. This is compiled by William Blum. So look at all these powers. All of this is happening in the 1900s and early 2000s. The asterisks mean that the powers were successfully overthrown. So if you overthrow a power, you create a lot of misery. So the United States has created a lot of misery throughout the whole globe. But sadly, most Americans have been deceived and do not know about this at all. The United States still maintains nearly 800 military bases in more than 70 countries and territories abroad. So if it looks and talks and walks and thinks like an empire, it's an empire. So what do the feet of iron and clay mean? We alluded to that a little bit earlier. I'll just read the whole passage here. This is the passage which describes the statue we talked about at the beginning, with the head of gold and the arms of silver and so on. As the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Whereas you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cling to one another, even as iron does not mingle with clay. In the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall its sovereignty be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cling to one another, even as iron does not mingle with clay. So you have clay and iron in the feet of this statue, and they mingle themselves with the seed of men. I think this is an unclean sexual reference. And why is that? Because this clay and this iron should not be mingling. Clay is a representative of people, humans, especially God's people. And the iron represents the Roman ruling elements. These two should not be mingling. The clay should be keeping themselves separate from the ruling powers, but they're not. So Adam's formed from clay. God breathes in him the breath of life. God is the potter. His people are the clay. And at Pentecost, the Spirit arrives and the church is brought to life, as it were, to spiritual life. So this is the clay, God's people. Now, the corruption of the clay in the Western Empire, the corruption of the clay is from the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, which have mingled with the Roman elements, the governments, in partnerships. The corruption of the clay in the Eastern Empire, I think that maybe that's what these 2 feet of the statue are referring to, Eastern and Western Empire, are the various Orthodox churches and their governments. For example, the head of the Orthodox Church and Vladimir Putin in Russia are close and work together in partnership. So just some pictures here. Here we have Constantine up on the top left here. Constantine presiding over the Council of Nicaea in 325. And here the church has corrupted itself by partnering with the emperor. Here we have King Henry VIII creating his own church, his own state church, because the Pope wouldn't let him remarry. And that church was as bad as the Roman Church. It persecuted and killed actual sincere Christians if they didn't bow to its authority. Here we have Vladimir Putin and the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Down here we have the head of the British State Church and Dave Cameron and the Queen. Here we have Bolsonaro in Brazil, who is a right-wing, fascist type of leader. And here we have the evangelical pastors tripping over themselves to try to get their hands on him and pray over him. They want the power, and they're quite willing to give up their principles to get it. Here we have Donald Trump, and here's a guy named Jeffress that is got his hands on Donald Trump, as the rest of them do there, or trying to. And the same situation has happened there. These evangelicals have compromised their principles for power. And that is why they act in such a bizarre way and such an anti-biblical way. Now, note there might be 3 possible fulfillments for this destruction. As I mentioned earlier, in iterative historicism, each fulfillment of prophecy gives us a better picture of what's coming later. So first, Rome was destroyed by the northern tribes in 476. So we have, remember, Constantine partnering with the church in order to solidify his empire. So this very unholy mixture of clay and iron in the feet. And that was destroyed. That was destroyed when Rome went down. Then papal power rose in its place and became the Holy Roman Empire and ruled over Western Europe. Now that ended in the French Revolution, as we talked about. It was that power that the Roman Church had was destroyed, and the Roman republics rose out of those monarchies. So we have the British Republic, the American Republic, and various republics across Europe. And then third, at the end, when Republican powers, I don't mean the Republican political party, I mean the Republican form of government, these powers that are ruling with corrupted churches are judged by Christ. And that's the last fulfillment that we're looking at and we're waiting for. And we can compare the prophecies that Jesus gave in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 as well. Here we have Babylon the Great. So Babylon the Great is pictured in Revelation chapter 17 as this harlot that's riding atop this beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast with 7 heads and 10 horns we've already identified as Rome in one of its states. And the harlot is the corrupted church that is riding the beast because it's in a partnership with the beast. We also note the harlot has children. The children would be the Protestant churches that came out of her. First, the state church in Britain, and then later the various Protestant and evangelical churches that had formed across the West. The 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire, for God has put it into their hearts to execute his purpose. And this is what is coming. On the left here is the current situation. On the right is what is coming, and it's coming probably sooner than later. But Babylon the Great sits on many waters. It has kings in immoral relationships. So Babylon says to these various kings, I will make you look holy. I will sanctify what you're doing, but you have to give me something too. So she's dressed in purple and scarlet, which are really colors of the Roman Catholic Church, has riches, rides the beast with 7 horns and 10 heads, is the mother of harlots. She has children, which are the Protestant churches. She's drunken with the blood of the saints. How so? The Roman Catholic Church has been one of the biggest persecutors of Christians in history, has killed many Christians, Anabaptists, and other Protestants. Has authority over kings, is very arrogant. During the Middle Ages, the Pope could excommunicate a king and completely end his rule. The 10 horns will be inspired by God to destroy her, and the 10 horns usually mean the Roman European power, according to Newton. Now we have this beast that was not, but is. This is a little bit tricky, but stick with me here. The 7 heads, these are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, the one is, the other has not yet come. But when he comes, he must continue a little while. The beast that was and is not is himself also an 8th and is of the 7, and he goes to destruction. So this 8th king is of the 7, one of the 7, and he goes off to destruction. The heads of this beast are the forms of government that this beast goes through. The horns are the constituent powers. So remember, the land beast has 2 horns, 2 powers, US, Britain. This beast has 10 horns. But the heads are the form of government. So the first 6 heads of Rome, if we go back in history, are kings, consuls, dictators, decemvirs, military tribunes, and emperors. That's 6. The Roman Republic came into being after the rule of kings. So after the rule of kings, we had a republic that was birthed. And so the consuls, dictators, decemvirs, military tribunes, and emperors are ruling over this republic now. The 7th head was the papacy. So the republic goes into the abyss for 1260 years, as we showed in the earlier slide, and papacy would come up and grow in strength across Europe and begin ruling over the kings and queens of Europe. But as we showed, that rule went down at the end of the 18th century. 1798, the Pope was put in prison by Napoleon, and that ended the power, the political, secular power, if you will, of the Roman Church. The 8th head, which arose out of the abyss, is of the 7. Well, it was the Roman republic that came into being after the rule of kings. So to be of the seven means it's republicanism. That is, the republics of Europe were rising after the French Revolution. And so monarchies gave way to republics across Europe. So the eighth head is republicanism. Not the political party republicanism, but the form of government. So where are we now and where are we headed? Well, with the election of Boris Johnson to a majority in Britain, and he's also known as the English Donald Trump, we can expect him to work closely with Trump as one of the heads of the land beast in days ahead. Judgment begins with the house of God, Peter says this. So don't compromise with Rome. Don't accept the mark of the beast. Stay loyal to Christ. Many of our brethren have fallen away from the faith. They've believed the deceptive lies that are coming out of this political system, religious system, and they have given their allegiance to the beast, and have therefore forsaken Christ. We must not do this. We must not allow ourselves to be taken in by this beast system. Stay loyal to Christ. Be no part of the world. The European Union are represented by the 10 horns that will attack corrupt Christianity. It is God that inspires them to do this, we're told in Revelation. Because the kings and merchants hide in fear when Babylon is punished, this suggests a socialist, humanist uprising, great earthquake, as it's called in Revelation. An earthquake so great that an earthquake greater than any other earthquake previously, and an earthquake so great it will never be repeated again. Now, earthquakes usually refer to revolutions or some other major social shaking that happens. So most likely this is going to be because the kings and the merchants in this vision, if you go look at it in Revelation, the kings and the merchants are hiding. So the kings are the political leaders, the merchants are the businessmen, the corrupt businessmen that are making a lot of money off of all of this. They're hiding in fear when Babylon is being punished. Why? Because Babylon is being destroyed by elements and they don't want to be destroyed by either. So this would most likely be a socialist humanist uprising. Daniel 11:40-45 has not been fulfilled yet. Everything up till there, we can see fulfillments in past history, but not this section of Daniel. So Daniel predicts more conflict and war in the Middle East, with, I think, the West likely losing and bringing an end to its power. So we can watch for this in the coming months and years. Climate change will continue to accelerate. This is another part of the deception of this beast, this clay and iron system. Both the conservative evangelical elements and the iron of the Roman ruling elements we find like in the Republican Party together are telling us that climate change is not real, even though that pretty much all the scientists in the world are saying otherwise. So, but these deceptions, these lies are very, very effective. Most people who are conservative would identify as conservative Christians would not believe that climate change is real, even though the science is settled. So climate change is real, the science is settled, and it will continue to accelerate. It's going to create extreme climate events, floods, droughts, food shortages, even earthquakes. A lot of people are beginning to think that earthquakes are even caused by climate change, an increase in earthquakes. Collapse of species, we're already losing 200 per day. And these fulfill Jesus' prophecies in Matthew chapter 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. Originally, these prophecies were fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem, which also had clay in the form of corrupt Jewish leadership with Rome, who had partnering with Rome to subjugate the people of Israel. But as I mentioned, iterative historicism suggests, those are my words, suggests that this will repeat, and I believe it will. Climate change is going to cause mass immigration, military conflicts over land, water, and food. So things are going to get really rough in the future. Now, when people realize they've been hoodwinked by paid climate deniers and their stooges, there will be retribution, i.e. the 10 horns attack Babylon. There's probably going to be lots of other reasons, but when people realize that the most likely case is that climate change is now unsolvable. We've hit so many tipping points that the earth is now headed towards disaster. There's going to be retribution for those who have misled us, and the ones that have misled us the most are the conservative political powers, the false churches, and others, oil companies and so forth. So do not be deceived. Rome is not your friend. The kingdom of God consists of all sincere Christians from all ethnicities, languages, and countries. Nationalism and racism are enemies of God's kingdom. When we think our country is Christian and better than others, we've already fallen into corruption. Our country is not better than others, and there are no Christian countries. The kingdom of God consists of all Christians from all countries, including those in China, Iran, Venezuela, so-called enemies of the United States. We're told to get out of Babylon, get out of here, my people. Well, how do we do that? Paul tells us we're in the world, but not of the world. So we need to ensure we don't end up with the mark of the beast on our forehead or our hand, so to speak. We're not deceived by the beast's propaganda. And pray for God's kingdom to come soon. The world is crying out for just and righteous government, and only Jesus Christ can provide that through the power of God the Father. This is just a reminder, and perhaps it's something that God has put here for us to remind us there is a rock coming to hit Rome and destroy it. Okay, Rome started here, this little town, and Rome is still here today. Well, thank you very much for paying attention, and please subscribe and check out more videos in the future.